It's my feel-good breakfast show.
It is your Feel Good Breakfast Show, Expresso on S3, and we want you to open up to something very, very important, and that's parenting advice. Now, we all want our kids to be generous and giving, but it doesn't come naturally to them. And this morning, parent coach Laura Markowitz joins us to talk about how parents can help their kids learn the act of sharing. So important because even us adults don't even get it right sometimes. So
that is true.
We all need some assistance. Laura, welcome to Expresso. It's so good to see you again.
Well, thank you. Lovely to be here.
I think sometimes, and you know, we always say this, we get so self-absorbed with the parenting advice because I'm going through this right now. My little one is 2 years old, so everything he says is mine. Laura, it's mine. It's his. Why is it so difficult for toddlers to share?
Oh, absolutely. I think you've just said it exactly as it is. We see that at 2 years old, these little toddlers, they're not exactly the most self-regulated, calm, able to manage their emotions, their feelings, their bodies. So they're very much kind of impulsive. It's very much, I see it, I want it. Their favorite words, exactly as you've said, Jamie, it's mine, my, I do it my way, me, no. Those are the words we're hearing a lot. So it's actually developmentally very difficult for toddlers to learn to share. And I think that doesn't mean we don't still encourage them to do it. Absolutely we do. But it's helpful for us to know it's pretty normal in terms of where they are developmentally for them to learn this thing of sharing. And that's what we're wanting. We're wanting them to be generous and sharing it. So it's quite hard for us. So it's important to just contextualize that it is quite a hard thing for them to take on at that age.
So when can we expect to see some sort of growth in generosity and empathy in kids? Is there an age we can expect? Because I know that this kind of runs through for a long time in terms of even the teens don't even share. So is there a time that you can say that empathy grows within those young kids?
So, you know, as with most things, it's always very nice if you can just see it on the calendar and go, okay, there, on that third birthday, they're suddenly going to become sharers or sleepers or whatever we're waiting for them to become. We wish we could do that. So, but generally around the age of 3, we do start seeing that kids are kind of getting the concept of taking turns, of sharing. They're starting to take it on board. They're not necessarily liking it. So it's not just because they're starting to conceptually get it. They're not necessarily absolutely okay with it. So it's very much important where we are as parents in terms of how we are supporting and encouraging them to learn this skill. That, as you say, doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's something that we've got to be helping them with. So I'd say around the age of 3, we start seeing them taking those things on board.
And then, Laura, obviously the big question right here is what should we as parents do when we are trying to teach our kids the principle of sharing?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, we don't want to diminish their difficult experience of sharing. So it's things like the empathy that we always talk about, things of, I know it's very hard to share your things. It's so hard to wait your turn. We don't want to be guilting them and shaming them. You know, if they're finding it hard to share, we don't want to be saying things like, you're a horrible little girl to not be sharing your things. We don't want to be doing that. Rather, we want to be actually respecting them. And so saying things like, we know it's very hard for you to share, but also for them to know that, whoops, we've just lost an earpod, sharing my earpod. But we also want to be respecting them. So if we know it's hard for them to share, then we're warning them. Before kids are coming around to play with them, we're saying, remember, we've got to share our toys. If there are 5 things that you find it's very hard for you to share, your special things, why don't we take them and put them away somewhere safe so you don't have to share those things, but the other things we'll need to share. So we respect that some of the things, that very precious things, might be very hard for them to share, their favorite things. Also, we want to ensure that they're not always the giver. So what I mean by that is, you know, if they're playing and they're drawing a picture and Cole's drawing with the green crayon and Jamie walks in and says, I want that green crayon, I'm taking it, and grabs it, that as a parent, I'm not just immediately taking it out of Carl's hands and giving it to Jamie. I'm saying, hang on a second. Carl was still drawing with it. You're just going to have to wait your turn. And so we hold that. It's not that we're just grabbing it out of Carl's hands straight away. And also to remember, if your child is struggling with sharing, we can, as parents, be quite anxious about play dates and getting them together with other children. Be careful of avoiding those sorts of things. Keep those things going because that's how they learn. So we've got to just be facilitating and be around to maybe help facilitate things as we have to do with play dates and as we have to do with siblings. So particularly this stuff comes up with siblings as well. And just a word of warning around that is just to be careful around constantly deferring to the baby. So, give it to your brother, Shan, he's only a baby. Shan, don't be horrible, you're much bigger than him, you must give it to him. Just remember that's still very hard, even if you are the big brother or the big sister. So those are just some of the things that we can try and hold as parents when we are trying to teach our kids this difficult but wanted skill of sharing and caring and being generous in the world.
Laura, thank you so much for the pearls of parenting wisdom thus far. We do have a part 2 coming up with Ryle very, very soon, where you can get to share so much more. So do stay with us as Laura, our parenting coach, has lots more for you. And I did mention this, to share, including a green crayon right here on Expresso. So stick around.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Thank you so much. Such valuable information and such awesome initiatives when it comes to dreaming and seeing out those kids' futures. Now, earlier in the morning, we were connecting with our certified parent coach, Laura Markovitz, and she was talking about how parents can better teach their children the principles of sharing. And we're continuing that conversation with her right now. And just making sure you're still on the line. Laura, you still with us?
I'm still here.
It's so good to have you. Now, you're obviously chatting to Carl and Jamie a little bit earlier, and one thing I believe they didn't get to touch on was the question of what is it that you would need to necessarily do. Let's say your kid is kind of not sharing in a public situation, right? So the scenario is that you may be in a shopping center or at a party and your kid doesn't want to share. How do you actually then deal with that situation without, it can get a bit embarrassing, I'd imagine, and you don't want to cause a scene, but what do you actually do and what's the best way to deal with that situation?
Yeah, so I think, our kids, we often see our kids as a reflection of us. And if they are not sharing and if they are not doing the things that we would like them to do and to be seen to be doing, they can often feel embarrassing and we can feel like failures, like we're not getting it right, and that, and especially when it's being witnessed by other people, that brings up so much for us. So exactly, you hit on embarrassing. You feel a bit shamed. So you often, as parents, our kind of reaction level kind of spikes up 500 levels because we are feeling so stressed. So we can often get even angrier with our child. We can sort of lose it with them, and we can amp up the actual experience of things. So just to normalize for us that feeling as parents that we get when our children aren't behaving the way that we'd ideally want them to behave. That's very hard for us. So I always say to parents, just take a deep breath. Know that this is normal. Know that you're not alone. You are not the only parent in the world who's having a child who's not wanting to share their toys or their crayons or whatever it is. Just to take that into perspective and take a deep breath so that you're better placed to respond to your child. And then whatever's happening, you're going to have to respond to it as is necessary. So it might be saying out loud to the people around, sure, Johnny's having a very difficult time sharing at the moment. He's really struggling to share at the moment. He's finding this very hard. We're going to need to go outside for a little bit until he calms down. Or we help him to share his things. So we might say, okay, he's really struggling to share this stuff. I'm going to give him 10 more seconds to play with it, and we can count to 10, and then it's going to be whoever's turn next. And then we actually sit with them and we say, did you hear what mommy said? We're going to count to 10, and then we're going to hand it over. And it's very hard for you to share. So we facilitate and we help. But my starting point is always with us. If we better placed to respond to things by taking that deep breath, by putting our hands on our hearts and knowing, this is hard, this is embarrassing, and it feels exposing, we better placed to respond to it, particularly in a public setting.
Yeah, it sounds so much that communication is really such an effective actioning tool to kind of use in these situations. And what you're saying when it draws back to the parent, I think is so important. So from your perspective, how important is role modeling then when it comes to actually sharing in this instant?
So, I mean, role modeling with anything in parenting, we know our kids, they're watching us, they're seeing what we do, they're like little sponges, they're taking it in. So they need to see that. You know, if we are around the house and I'm saying, give me the salt, or I'm grabbing things from my partner or from one of the other kids in the house, that's what they're seeing. So it's so important that we are showing them that. When we're having to wait for something as well, because often it's that delayed gratification, that having to wait for something, which is incredibly hard for us as adults and as for kids particularly hard. So for them, that's really, really hard and they want to just do it. So we've got to say, very hard for me to wait my turn. I've got to wait. And I'm going to stand here and I'm going to wait, and I'm going to breathe, or I'm going to sing a song, or I'm going to do something to keep me busy while I'm waiting. And then if I've waited and I've got to, there, I've got the thing that I was waiting for, even though it was very hard to wait. So absolutely, role modeling is always important, that they're kind of seeing what we're doing. They're learning from it all the time.
Okay, Laura, look, I feel like I'm learning, and I think Mzansi is too. So let's just nail this and make sure that we are on board with you. Let's put this into practice. So if I could throw a scenario your way once again, because I think this is how best we also learn. If we find two kids fighting over a toy and we approach the situation, what do we do in that moment?
It sounds like approaching this crisis. If we approach tentatively, and I think it's fair to say. So if we are there and we've actually witnessed two kids fighting over a toy, again, it's going in there and going, wow, we're having a really hard time sharing this toy. If I can see that one of the kids had the toy first, then I'm going to say, Jane had the toy first, so we're going to give it to her, and she's going to play with it for a little bit, and then you're going to have to wait your turn. And it's like I was saying earlier, when we chatted earlier this morning, you know, it's not to immediately take it away from the child who initially had it, because fairness is incredibly important to children. It's important to all of us. So we've got to remember fairness. They feel it. If we want them to become generous in the world, then we want to hopefully get them to voluntarily share, more than just forcing them to share. So in a scenario like this, we want to help them say, you know, she's going to play with it first. Jane had it. She's going to give it. We're going to give her a few minutes to play. And when she's ready, she's going to give it to you. And the child who doesn't have it might be crying and very upset. So we're going to have to hold them. We're going to have to say, very hard to share. I know you've got to wait your turn. If Jane then refuses to give up this toy for however long, then we're going to have to step in and say, you know, Jane, you've had it for a long time. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to play with it for a little bit longer. And we're going to count to 10. And then it's going to be John's turn. So we might have to facilitate that stuff a little bit as we're doing it. But just to remember, fairness is important to them. We're not just trying to just grab. And if the toy becomes this absolutely hot item that keeps being a problem, then we might have to say, guys, I can see this is really being very difficult for both of you. I'm going to take this toy away for a while, and let's play with something else. Oh. So we might have to step in and do that if it's becoming too hard.
Oh, Laura, I wish I could chat to you the entire day just to prep me for my parenting when it does come through. But I can't thank you enough for this morning. Such useful tips and good advice. I think everybody out there in Mzansi as well is appreciative of you. So thank you so much for sharing this morning. And I believe this process is definitely something that a child can use to learn generosity as well as resilience.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the time.
Have a beautiful one.
New to